Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real, live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas, but didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew 30 million on the place. Yes, 30 million dollars, and they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate, and was even the blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where factual nature of the story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and obviously wasn't because the foreigners were lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I seriously doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beach side of the Emerald Isles in North Carolina, Disney began to construct Mowgli's Palace. In the late 1990s, the concept was a jungle-based themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the middle of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character Mowgli, then you might better remember the story Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you've noticed a Disney cartoon in the decades past. Mowgli was an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened/pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there's actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes and turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that just had been constructed was immediately condemned with little or no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some financial highway project, knowing full well what was going to be going on. People started calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was concept art, a group that stuffed shirts from Disney Co. and actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how luxury of the project was going for everyone. When they showed the concept art, a gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say everyone flipped their shirt. We're taking on a large Indian palace jungle with loincloths, not only in the center of reality wealth area, but with somewhat xenophobic area in the southern USA. It was questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm at the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well, and houses were razed and land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do about it or even say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and the local Venus came to play, and their opinions turned on a dime. Construction was complete. Visitors stayed at the resort. Surrounding communities flooded with traffic and usual annoyances associated with the influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all happened. Disney just shut it down, and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney loss was pretty hilarious and a wonderful thing to a large group of folks who didn't want this place in the first place. I honestly didn't give the other place a thought, since hearing most closed over a decade ago, I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald, so I only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who had explored Treasure Island and posted a whole blog about all this crazy shit he found in there. Stuff like just left behind, things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all probably just had a hand in it wrecking the place. People there just felt angry about Treasure Island, and the folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to make take a few swings at some merchandise after that. Well, what I'm getting at is this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since the closing, I figured out that it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted my time getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I found out about Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of the year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, there was no official Disney site or resource made on any mentioning the place. It had been subbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought about this blog or this place post a photo or anything. Nothing on the local TV or newspaper site said one word about the place, though that would be expected since they all had swung Disney's way. They wouldn't know. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links for such results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's not that anyone spoke about the resort, but rather their words were made unaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. I had to go, and it was on this old as hell map that I received in a mail back in the 90s. It was a potential item sent out by the people who had recently been to Disney World. I guess since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang into it, but I got shoved in with my books and my comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it into. But I did find it. The locals were no help, and most were transplants that had moved into the beach many years ago. Or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where'd I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me an ordinarily long corridor of an overgrowth, tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area mixed with native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort, tremendous monotheistic wooden gates whose supports were on the either side looked they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been groated in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away by the base of the burrowing insects. Hanging on to the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap and hand-painted in letters scrawled in black, "Abandoned by Disney." Clearly the handiwork of some past local or an employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough for me to walk through, but not to drive, so grabbing my digital camera and a map, whose flip-sided showed me a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entranceway. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among the piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of penile flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material, which was most unlikely for an information booth or an outdoor bar that is now simply a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by the past of vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing about the grounds was the statue of Baloo, a friendly bear from the Jungle Book, who stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave toward no one, staring into an empty space with a silly toothy grin and a bird's shit-covered hole spots on his fur and vines ensnarled in his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find that the outside building had been covered in graffiti where the original paint had peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they had been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, something had once again painted, "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about this awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. Inside the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people have stolen molding off of walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were resting amid the empty echo chamber that amplified every step a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed into all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen, as you would imagine, an industrial food prep area with all of the appliances in space, no expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like a very old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably hanging cuts of meat. As I stood inside for the moment, I noticed that they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random position, but their movements were slow and small. It was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist and carefully letting go, but within seconds it started swinging once more. The bathrooms were in such state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island Resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commissary with coconuts and other implements with... There was about half an inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there for very long. That's odd. What's odd about the toilets is the stinks and the bitters in the ladies' room. Yes, I went there. All dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed that they should have been shut the water off a long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have the time to look at them all. A few I did peer into similarly wrecked, but I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought it was actually a television or radio in one room. I think I really heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper. Probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, but just another case of the sound of the water flowing and playing tricks on the mind. Is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. Short, unknown reply. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you. Unknown reply, or possibly just weeping. I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced, but why I thought there might have been someone running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who have holed up and then probably would have knifed me. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note, or had anything to waste my trip up. As I looked out of the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I apparently missed. Something that would have given me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up in sunning itself in some pedestal right next to the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting it, so the light fell upon the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the detail of its face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, then turned, and slithered off the pedestal across the grass and into the trees. All 80 feet of it. Its head long disappeared into the woods before its even tail left the sunning spot. Disney had released all of their exotic pets into the grounds. Right there on my footplan map was a reptile house. I should have known. I'd read more about the sharks in Treasure Island, but I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, utterly stupefied. My mouth must hang open for the longest time before I came back to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had just been, back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances in backing my way into the building. I took a few deep breaths and slapped my own face to get myself right in the head after that. I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were not feeling a bit jelly at this point. Of course, there was No place to sit down. I wanted to recline on my broken glass and deaf leaf carpet or haul myself into a desk for questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near Palace's lobby and decided I'll go have a seat there, maybe until I feel better. The staircase was fair enough, away from the front of the building and relatively clean. Save for starting the accumulation for dust, I pulled the wedge of metal in the wall and once again, with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I became such accustomed to, I placed the wedge in the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward. Below ground level, using any flash camera I used as some sort of improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended at a metal door with a padlock, and the sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only! Thank you." I perked up in my spirits a little bit, for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would provide definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not vandals, not looters, nobody. This was the place. I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or wantonly steal. I had only come to the palace essentially agreeing to myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust a lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall of the padlock it was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend all the metal plate enough for the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of or been able to do this whole entire time. The mascots only area was startling and very welcomed every chance from the rest in building I've seen, and for one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated. Even though they flickered and had faded randomly, also, nothing had been stolen or broken. Even if it aged, an exposure would definitely take their toll. Tables and notepads and pens, there were clocks. Even a punching clock on the wall, complete with the fill-out time cards. Chairs were scattered around there, and it was even a small break room with an old static-filled television and long-rotted food and drink on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in the state of evacuation. As I walked through the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascots-only area, the sights became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered, and most melting away of the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotten crimson floor covering. Everything just felt sort of squishy. Anything would disintegrate into mush, and when I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing items hang from the hooks in one of the rooms fell completely and almost into threads. I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was the light, becoming more and more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words "Character Prep" stenciled onto it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured it was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted to get a photograph of what twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever the angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up, started to walk away. That's when there was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. Inside the room was completely dark. Pitch black. I used my camera flash to look for a light switch in the wall by the door, but there was absolutely nothing. As I made my search, I jarred out my sense of excitement with a loud electric buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading out and like the rest that I had passed. The room was exactly how I pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from the invisible noses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native costumes on the hangers toward the back. But what I found odd And what I wanted to photograph right away was a Mickey Mouse costume. At the center of the room, unlike any of the other costumes, it was laying on its back. In the center of the room, like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should have been white, and white where he should have been black. His normally red overalls were a light blue. The sight of this putting off that, I actually put off photographing it thing till last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls. Upward angles, downward angles, side shots show an entire row of the frozen, parted cartoon faces, with some plastic eyes missing. When I decided to stage a shot, just one of the bed-riddled characters on a stick grimly floor. I reached for the headpiece of the Donald Duck costume and carefully removed the thing so it wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked at the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering noise made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and where between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. The only empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved for the floor. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had taken a picture of it, you know. I had to, for any number of reasons. It may seem silly, but I had to, even if you don't think, though. I needed proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind from the start, and even if it was just gross intelligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, the photo negative, opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to give up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whatever was inside of it, stood there in the center of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me. As I mumbled, "No," over and over and over. With shaking hands and a violently thrashing heart and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly seizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of that thing. It was perfectly silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved to. That's when the camera died, went black and quiet, and broken. I raised my eyes over again to Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey!" it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Want to see my head come off?" I stared. It started to pull off its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck and clawing an impatient movement similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free from a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood, so much thick, chunky, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. I only cared about getting away. Above the doorway, out of the room, I saw a final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of that camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from the place, fled for my sanity if not for my very life, I knew why Disney wanted no one to find out about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. But they didn't want anything like that getting out. Hey guys, I hope you liked this creepypasta. If you guys could do me a quick solid and just like or favorite this video, leave a comment, or subscribe to me if you have not. Also, you can now follow me on Twitter at creepylaypasta, just one word, or you can email me at matthew.pelton.1999 at gmail.com. Also, if you guys have anything like requests or comments or anything like that, do not be afraid to speak up. I'll see you guys later. Have a good